One of the most misunderstood phrases in auditing and drone culture is this: publicly accessible. A lot of people hear publicly accessible and assume that it means exactly the same as public land. But legally, those are not necessarily the same thing. And that distinction matters because many places that look public and feel public are actually privately owned spaces which merely allow public access. Examples include shopping centres, retail parks, supermarket car parks, some promenades and business parks, certain waterfront developments. Right, these places are often publicly accessible, but they're not automatically public land. The public can go there under what's known as implied permission or implied licence. In simple terms, the owner is allowing members of the public to enter for normal lawful purposes. But because the land remains privately owned, that permission can be withdrawn, which means if security for the area or the landowner asks you to leave and you refuse, you might become a trespasser. Now, this is where people often get confused. Trespass in the UK is usually a civil matter, not a criminal offence. So security guards do not suddenly gain unlimited powers. They generally can't confiscate your equipment, demand ID without a lawful basis, or invent laws that don't exist. But equally, the phrase, "it's publicly accessible, therefore I can stay here or go here," is legally weak. Publicly accessible does not automatically mean publicly owned. Now, compare that with genuinely public land. For example, adopted public highways, many pavements, public rights of way, some council-owned public spaces. In these locations, the legal position is often much stronger for the photographer, drone pilot, or even the auditor, because the public generally has a recognised legal right to be there. That's a distinction, and it's key. Public land versus publicly accessible land. Two different things. And there's another layer to this. It's the airspace law. Even if you can't legally launch a drone from a particular piece of private land, you can still legally fly over it. Unless it's a restricted site, of course, or it falls under one of the other laws that would restrict it. And, of course, as long as you're operating with the CAA regulations. Quite complicated, but, we have to live with these complications if we don't want to go to jail. So launch rights, land access rights, and airspace rights. Three things that a lot of people think are the same, but they're all completely separate legal concepts. And unfortunately, a lot of internet arguments blur them all together. But the reality is, both sides of the argument often simplify it. The security guards wrongly believe private land means no filming and no drones. And that's often incorrect. But some auditors wrongly believe publicly accessible means public land, because that's often also incorrect. The law is more nuanced than either of these sides suggest. And understanding that distinction can save drone pilots, photographers, and even auditors a lot of unnecessary confrontation, which is really against what the auditor wants. The auditor actually thrives on the confrontation. However, if you're not an auditor and you want to avoid confrontation, you really need to know the difference, the distinct difference between land that is public and land that is publicly accessible. In short, in summary, public land means that you can be on the land and not be asked to leave it unless you're doing something wrong, like I don't know, breaking the law, then the police can say, we're going to make you leave it by throwing you in the back of the paddy wagon and taking you away. But if you're on public land and you're not committing an illegal act, you're absolutely fine. But if you're on publicly accessible land, for any reason whatsoever, you don't have to be breaking the law. The security for that publicly accessible area, or the owners or representatives of the owner, can ask you to leave. They don't have to give you a reason. You don't have to be doing anything wrong. They can just ask. You may then have later on a claim of discrimination, right? He asked me to leave because my hair was white. He asked me to leave because I had too many freckles. Something along those lines. But at the time, they are legally entitled to ask you to leave. And if you don't leave when they ask you to, it then becomes a matter of trespass, which is civil, but can turn into criminal if it becomes aggravated. And there are easy arguments that can be made to say that your trespass is actually a criminal offence. So, if you are on publicly accessible land and you're asked to leave by the security for the area or a representative of the owner, the safest thing to do is to leave. And if you then want to complain about it or put in a court action against them for discrimination, go ahead and do it. You may win, you may not win. The worst thing you can do is dig your heels in and say, I'm not leaving, because then you could have a criminal offence looking at you. If you're an auditor, you'll be looking for that confrontation to film it, okay? But I'm not here to talk for the auditors. Thanks for watching. Cheerio the now.